Elegant in design, precise in function, built with one purpose: to end lives. The machinery of execution stole from and inspired many of the world's greatest inventions. It mechanized torment and terror. Coming up, the engineering behind the modern machines of Malice. As the Western world entered the modern era, enlightened minds sought to create execution machines with humanity. Engineers invented devices to end life quickly while exploiting the principles of gravity, torque, velocity, and electricity. The word capital in capital punishment actually comes from the Latin word caput, meaning head. This refers to crimes of the most serious nature, punishable by beheading.
Dying by axe, there was always the chance that the executioner wasn't going to be strong enough, that it was going to take more than one blow.
During the French Revolution, beheading gets mechanized with a device capable of lopping off a head every 10 seconds. They call this machine the guillotine.
The original goal was to come up with a method of execution that was quick and painless for the victim as possible.
The guillotine is a giant mechanized knife designed to remove heads. With the release of a rope, gravity pulls on the blade and sends it down through a channel. The blade severs the neck upon impact, and the head falls a short distance into the wicker basket below. But the inventors of the guillotine needed to overcome an inherent problem with cutting. If a blade is flat, it creates a messy chop, not a clean cut.
An angled blade is one of the best ways to slice things. If you think about somebody trying to cut a piece of meat, you're going to angle your blade and you're going to push it through. That's much more efficient than taking a flat blade and putting it on your meat and then trying to cut it.
The angled blade of the guillotine revolutionized the beheading business. It weighs 15 pounds and with repeated filing becomes razor sharp. But an angled cut is not enough to remove a head. The power behind the cut comes from 70 pounds of dead weight, called a mouton, stacked on top of the blade.
The reason why it has to be so heavy on the top is to create enough energy to cleanly sever the head. If you don't have enough energy coming down, you might leave the person only cutting halfway through.
The guillotine blade travels up and down between two upright posts, 14 feet high. Executioners hoist 85 pounds to the top of the posts with a rope and pulley system. They lock the blade into position with a spring-loaded clasp. But it's hard work severing a head.
The neck is a very strong structure. It's designed to hold the head so the head can rotate and so forth. And the bone structure, the vertebral column, is very, very strong. So it takes a lot of energy to sever the head from the body.
This is why traditional beheadings are rarely precise. Unskilled executioners and dull blades leave victims severely wounded, but far from dead. It sometimes takes several blows to the neck to completely remove the head.
The axe and the sword not only could be difficult to remove the head, but you could also get crushing injuries as well as cutting injuries and make it a very painful death.
Falling. So really, your impulse would probably be to put out your hands to catch yourself.
Experts wonder if the guillotine encouraged the vast volume of bloodshed during the French Revolution.
As an execution device, it's quite quick and quite painless if done correctly.
This is why the guillotine remains an approved method of capital punishment in France until 1981. For nearly 200 years, this device keeps heads rolling.
This was a very messy way to die, and maybe people became kind of uncomfortable with that. Maybe people became uncomfortable with the idea of 10, 15, 20 people dying every single day right in front of them.
But the physical and social flaws of the guillotine did not dull the theory of an angled knife blade. Today, the angled blades of box cutters are commonplace in household toolboxes, and the angled blades of surgical knives help to save countless lives. While the French create a revolutionary device to take off heads, the Spanish unveil a technological upgrade for strangulation. Turning to a proven screw drive technology, the Spanish engineer a machine that delivers an unbelievable pain in the neck. They call it the garrote.
Even a well-meaning executioner, a well-meaning design can possibly go wrong and possibly inflict more pain than the original design.
The first garrote is a simplistic way to strangle a condemned prisoner. The executioner brings a loop of rope over the head and ties the ends together as he twists the cudgel stick. The more he turns the stick, the greater the pressure on the condemned's neck. Ultimately, the prisoner dies from asphyxiation.
In this example, we are using a simple concept of torque, which is a force applied from a distance. And the bigger your lever arm is, the more force and torque you can apply to whatever you're trying to do. And as you can see right now, I am really working this. This is quite a bit of force. The reason why this is so hard is its load is being transferred into an area that is the entire distance of this rope. So if I'm applying, say, 200 pounds on this of torque, it's being applied all the way around the rope. It's not like a point load that you would have in the center of the neck, which means you'd have 200 pounds going through the center of the neck. The more area you can disperse your load, the harder it is for you to apply a load.
The problem with this device is that it requires a really strong executioner. A garroting is basically a slow-motion horizontal hanging, but it's human hands powering the execution, not gravity.
This kind of death is not pleasant for the victim. Generally, a black hood was placed over the victim's face to protect the crowd from what would happen. I mean, think about any time you start choking. The face is going to turn red, it's going to turn purple. More than likely, as the person asphyxiates, the limbs will start twitching, they'll start struggling. This is not a pleasant thing to watch.
Ironically, during the Inquisition, death by garroting is considered merciful.
Even if you had converted to Catholicism, you did not escape your death sentence. Instead, you were offered a presumably quicker and easier way of execution rather than being burned alive at the stake.
After the garroting, the inquisitors would burn the lifeless body of the newly converted.
It was a proven technique, it obviously worked, but it was due only to the power of the executioner and obviously not a very humane way to go. So when they wanted to design a more humane way of executing victims, they decided to simply upgrade the design and make it mechanical.
In 1852, the Spanish unveil a kinder and gentler garrote. It promises to make the work of the executioner easier and the death less painful to the condemned. The modern garrote replaces the original rope and stick with metal screw technology. Now, by twisting a handle, the executioner sends a massive screw through the post of the garrote and into the victim's neck. The sharp bolt should separate the top two vertebrae and sever the spinal cord. Death is supposed to come instantly and painlessly.
When the executioner would come up, he would twist this, applying a torque to put pressure into the back of his head and separate his actual spinal column from his head. You have to transfer your work energy from a human into a mechanical device. This becomes a lot more efficient than the actual rope they used. Now, simple engineering tells us that the smaller the lever for the screw, the harder it is to turn. It takes more force. This is extremely easy and fluid. The further you go out, the easier it gets. You go into the center, it doesn't get that much harder, but you can definitely tell it takes more.
Another improvement of the long drop is the position of the knot on the neck. By placing the coils of the rope under the left ear, the rope snaps the head back at the end of the drop. This delivers enough force to break the vertebra.
They realized if they properly placed the knot on the left side of the neck, the head would snap and it would cause that rapid fracture. Placing the knot on the left side was the best side and it would cause the most instantaneous fracture and death.
But did the early gallows engineers make the proper calculations? Testing a replica of the long drop gallows is the best way to find out.
As the condemned would walk up the stairs in a strange twist of fate, the work energy that he is producing by going up these stairs when he stops on his platform creates potential energy. When he comes over to the noose and is dropped a certain distance, that becomes kinetic energy. The condemned walking up the stairs is creating all the energy that ultimately will kill him.
This replica includes a simple mechanical system to open the trapdoor and send the condemned to his death.
Back in the day, what they would do is they would take a pin connected to a rope through a pulley system. The sandbag is released, it actually will go through and pull through some more pulleys the pin that is connected to the trapdoor. That's a rapid effect. Trapdoor will go extremely quick. Therefore, the potential energy turns into kinetic energy a lot faster, so the person will not lose energy as he's falling.
The engineers want to first test the precise amount of force applied on the rope when it jerks to a stop. The long drop should generate 1,000 pounds of force, but this seems like a lot of weight for standard grade hemp rope. Attached in line with the noose is a dynamometer. It will measure the sudden force of the load created by the falling dummy.
We're clear? Clear.
Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3. Whoa.
The rope snaps unexpectedly as the dummy hits the bottom of the drop.
Dynamometer read 640 pounds, which means that 640 pounds of force was launched onto his neck as he fell. So 640 pounds is actually the breaking strength of this rope. That also shows you the importance of how good your rope needed to be back in the day.
So how did 19th century executioners hang people without snapping the rope? They pre-stretched the rope the night before so it would expand like a rubber band rather than snap on impact. For this next test, the engineers string up a pre-stretched rope to see if dropping a person too far will indeed trigger a decapitation. The engineers have intentionally chosen a rope that's 3 inches too long. If the dummy falls too far, the impact will overwhelm the neck and cause it to tear apart.
3, 2, 1.
The head of the dummy rips off completely. Although hangings are usually public events, spectators find decapitations unsettling. This time, the engineers match up a 5.5-foot length of rope with the 185-pound anthropomorphic dummy. They're relying completely on the 1913 long drop calculation table.
3, 2, 1.
The dummy's head remains attached, and there's no chance of a drawn-out strangulation. While these mock executions take several minutes to perform, by the mid-20th century, a hanging execution takes just 15 to 20 seconds between the time a prisoner leaves his cell to the time he falls through the trap door. The cold-blooded efficiency of hangings culminates with nearly 13,000 men and 500 women dying in the United States alone. The principles behind the long drop now save lives instead of taking them. Information from ratings charts similar to the long drop are used in rock climbing. Engineers design dynamic ropes that stretch when a climber falls to absorb the lethal forces. Of all the modern-day execution machinery, there is one in particular that fails more often because of human error. This form of capital punishment merges a readily available technology, the rifle, with human physical skill to execute the condemned quickly and mercifully.
Detail. Ready?
They call it
Aim.
the firing squad.
Fire.
Here you have a modern technological device which had to be used in tandem by the person in order to kill someone. You really had kind of a melding of man and machine in order to carry out this execution.
The civilian firing squad aims to execute criminals as efficiently as possible. It consists of 3 to 5 riflemen. Each stands 20 feet from the condemned. On the squad leader's command, firing begins, and odds are that one of the bullets will instantly stop the heart. The firing squad exploits readily available rifle technology to quickly dispatch condemned criminals. In theory, it makes sense. Militaries have used firing squads to punish desertion and mutinies since the invention of the rifle in 1498.
Especially in the military, rifles were readily available. You had marksmen right there, and they had plenty of ammo. It was the easiest way to execute someone.
From the early 1900s to 1950, American civilian firing squads rely on the Springfield 30 caliber rifle. It's the most popular military sniper rifle and sees action in World War I, II, and the Korean and Vietnam conflicts. The Springfield is known as an incredibly powerful long-range weapon.
Pick a rifle over a handgun because the rifle's more accurate, has a longer barrel, it's harder to shake, and you have a longer aim point.
The longer barrel of a rifle gives it more accuracy over a handgun. The slightest waver in a pistol's line of sight sends the bullet off target dramatically.
For the person in the chair, obviously this was very psychologically traumatizing even before they got riddled with bullets. You've got someone already bound, they're sitting in a chair. Before the hood is placed on their head, they're probably seeing the people who are going to be responsible for their death.
Using a rifle, it is a very efficient machine, but it's only as good as the operator.
These people were not sharpshooters. They were civilians. Regardless of whether or not they were actually aiming for the heart, you couldn't really tell where they were going to hit the person. They could hit them in the shoulder, they could hit them in the leg. Even if one person missed trying to fire for the heart,
Fire.
chances of 5 people missing while shooting for the heart was pretty slim. More than likely, this person was going to die either very quickly of hemorrhagic shock or an actual hit to the heart or the head.
To skillfully aim a rifle demands complete focus on the part of the trigger man. But a reluctance to take another person's life can psychologically affect the accuracy of the gunman.
Humans usually will go along with an authority figure. When you're talking about execution, that's a hugely powerful psychological tool. If you can convince somebody that they're no longer really responsible for what they're doing, that person is much more likely to do what you tell them to do.
To minimize the potential for human error, the penal system creates a psychological ruse.
There were a lot of psychological aspects designed to make this whole process easier for the people carrying it out. You could have been told that one of the people shooting was actually firing blanks. You put a hood over the person's head, dehumanizing them. You didn't have to see their face. You had a big target put on them, so really you only had the one thing to focus at rather than looking at the whole person as the thing you were shooting. There were a lot of things there to really assuage your guilt over actually thinking about killing another human being.
Fire.
If, after all of these civilians had failed to kill this person, only then would the leader have to go up and actually shoot the victim in the side of the head.
In this last volley, we had 3 pretty good shots. One looked like a kill shot, but in the event that the rounds did not kill the individual right away, and he was still alive, it would be the job of the officer in charge to walk up with his pistol, chamber around, and shoot the individual in the head, basically giving him the coup de grace.
In a backlash to the gun violence of the early 1970s, the firing squad rapidly falls out of favor. But to this day, condemned criminals in Idaho and Oklahoma can still request this form of execution. Around the world, as many as 80 other countries continue to use firing squads as their primary form of execution. It persists for the same reasons it began. A ready supply is up for debate.
Some people have inferred from the idea that the skull insulates the brain that not enough electricity will get to the brain to shut it down during an electrocution.
There's a simple visual test to observe if voltage can travel through the skull directly into the brain. It requires a purchase from the local butcher shop to simulate the human brain.
Here we have brain matter, and we have bone to simulate skull. We're going to use an oscilloscope to see if current does get to the brain, even when you apply voltage to the skull.
An oscilloscope is a device that translates voltage into a graphic display. When there is no voltage, the screen is black or shows a flat line.
So there's no electric current running through the brain tissue right now. I'm going to introduce some with a stun gun. This is about 2,000 volts. You're going to be able to see the current in between the two electrodes until I pass it into the brain. That current will disperse throughout the brain tissue. You'll see it register here on the oscilloscope until I pull the electrodes back out.
So now there's a baseline. The oscilloscope shows high voltage traveling through the brain matter. As humankind begins to understand electricity in the modern age, executioners capitalize on its lethal attributes. The inventors of the electric chair know that electricity can kill, but they don't know how. One theory is that the skull insulates the brain from the electric jolt. As a result, the electricity kills the brain by cooking it. An initial baseline test shows that high voltage travels easily through brain matter. But the brain is protected by the skull, and it's the skull where the voltage first hits the victim.
Some people think because the skull insulates the brain that not enough electricity will get to the brain to shut it down during an electrocution. So we're going to use a piece of bone to simulate skull. And I'm going to zap the skull and see if we still get the same readout from the brain tissue. Yeah, you can see still quite a bit of electricity going through the brain tissue, even when it has to pass through the skull.
The high voltage easily travels from the skull into the brain. But how does this current kill? Does it cook the brain, or does it short it out?
There is a myth that exists that when a person is electrocuted in a legal electrocution, that their body is going to heat up to a boiling temperature and that their eyeballs are going to explode and all these terrible things are going to happen. So I'm going to take a hot dog, and I have to warn you that what I'm doing is dangerous. I would actually characterize it as stupid. Do not try this at home. I'm going to put one end of a nail into one end of the hot dog. I'm going to put the other end of the nail into the other end of the hot dog, push it in a little bit to make some good contact. Okay, here we go. There we go. And you'll notice that there's not a lot happening. This would be very much like a legal electrocution in the sense that the body itself isn't going to heat up massively. Okay, at this point, we're starting to hear the effects of heating in the hot dog.
It takes nearly 1 minute for signs of heat to appear on the hot dog. This is more than double the time of the electric cycle during an execution.
So I'm going to unplug this. I'm going to see if we can get a temperature on the hot dog. The reading would be just a little over 106 degrees. Now, that would be consistent with what we know about illegal electrocution. And if I pick this up, it is warm to the touch, but it's not exceptionally hot.
A rapid rise in body temperature is not enough to quickly kill a healthy adult. So just how does a person die when sentenced to the electric chair?
Basically, every electrical cell in your body is going to what we call depolarize, and that basically means fire and do its job.
Say you have one neuron in your brain that's responsible for you breathing in. You have another neuron in your brain that's responsible for you breathing out. You stimulate both of those at the same time, your body can't breathe in and out. Same thing for your heart beating, same thing for any system in your body. When you're firing all of those neurons at once, you're completely overloading your system.
So the electric chair kills by completely overwhelming and confusing the human body. The brain effectively shorts out, and eventually the heart stops beating. During a legal electrocution, the jolt delivers 2 cycles of electricity. The high voltage of the first cycle takes out the brain and nervous system.
This is going to be the nerves going to his brain, the nerves going to his heart, the nerves going to his arm, to his bowels, to his mouth.
It usually results in permanent brain death, but it might not be enough to stop the heart, which can continue beating.
Their muscles will still contract, their face will contort.
The on-site medical examiner can only pronounce death upon cessation of the heart. This is why the second cycle has lower voltage and lower amperage. This causes the heart to fibrillate, throwing the muscles out of rhythm, and induces a heart attack.
Some people may die immediately due to cardiac arrest, and others may suffer a little longer until eventually their heart or their brain does give out.
Probably as our society has evolved, it certainly does not have the appeal that perhaps it had 100 years ago. The difference, I think, is that maybe the definition of what is cruel and unusual has changed.
Today, most states have abandoned the electric chair as they search for more humane methods of capital punishment. But electricity has pushed society forward in countless ways. The technology of the modern era definitely advanced the engineering of execution equipment. In an attempt to create more humane death devices, machine builders mechanized old techniques, borrowed from the military, and exploited a power phenomenon. But now, these mechanisms are viewed as some of history's most malicious machines.